Facebook friends. I don't know who's with us tonight, but welcome to the Bible study. And we're going to get started here. We've got our outline as usual. Let me tell you where a lot of this information comes from. I've got lots of resources here. This book, No Reason to Hide by Erwin Lutzer, so good. This is probably my favorite I've read so far. And he just goes through a whole bunch of different topics, and each one of them is so biblically based. It's very good. This one is called One Race, One Blood. This is put out by Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis. And this is actually Ken Ham and Charles Ware. Charles Ware is a black pastor. So he kind of gives his perspective on a lot of this. Very interesting information. It's a lot more specifically about, I don't even know how to describe it. It's about race, but it's not so much about critical race theory as much as it is just about race, if that makes any sense. It's more of a wider viewpoint on race. And then, and what the Bible says about race. It's really good. It's got some good stuff in it. And then this book from Voddie Baucham, it's called Fault Lines. And this is really Voddie Baucham's response. And he was the first one to put out a book on social justice and a response from a biblical point of view. So he's got some really interesting stories in here, especially because he moved back to Africa, or not back, he's from the United States, but he moved to Africa in an attempt to kind of understand his roots and to reach the African people with the gospel. And so he just has some really neat stories. And he kind of comes back and forth, Africa and America, and kind of gives his perspective in that book. It's really good. So I also have here a few little articles. This is not just an article. This is a study that was published in a journal, the Journal of Law and Religion. And this person is kind of writing, you kind of take it with a grain of salt from what perspective he's coming from. But it's called Christianity and Human Rights, Past Contributions and Future Challenges. And this article was written in 2015, but it was very eye-opening to me from the perspective of understanding. I used to wonder, where do people think that their rights came from if they don't think they came from God? And he kind of explained that. So I thought that was a very interesting article. Also, when I was getting my master's in counseling, I had to read a book called Developing Multicultural Counseling Competence, a Systems Approach. What I did not realize at the time was that this was a master's level class on critical race theory. Even though it's under the heading of multiculturalism, which critical race theory often is under that heading. It's kind of a euphemism for critical race theory. So I had an entire semester master's level class on critical race theory, and this is just a compilation of quotes that I took from that book, especially when it comes to Christianity and what they taught about Christianity. And they taught a lot about Christianity. And then this is the last one I'll show you. This is I printed this off from the web. This is a chart that was put out by the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is managed by the Smithsonian. So this is the Smithsonian Museum website. And it is a chart that shows you what white culture is. It's actually defining what it means to be white in the United States. So we'll talk a little bit about this, but if you want to see it or anything, you can see it. So just wanted you to know that I have all of these source materials, because we're going to talk about a lot of these, and you may be interested to see more about it or not. So let's get started. Critical race theory. Do y'all know what critical race theory is? Are you familiar? You do? Okay. Well, how would you define it?
The theory that they've been teaching in schools and just in general, that like white people's spirits hate black people, and that the white man is privileged, the black man, there's systemic racism. If you're black, you just cannot be racist. If you're white, you have to be, and it's just always like that.
That's right. Where'd you learn?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So anybody else? Are you familiar with it, Dawn? You know?
Heard of it, but.
Yeah, okay. White privilege. Heard of white privilege? Yeah. So a lot of people won't know what critical race theory is, but they know what white privilege is if you talk about that. And they're like, oh, okay, white privilege. Critical race theory comes from, it actually branched off of critical theory from the 1960s. And critical theory is pretty much just a modern reframing of Marxism. That's all it is. And then Marxism or critical theory is not framed, in the 1960s, it wasn't framed from a racial perspective. And so critical race theory is kind of basically taking that idea of Marxism or critical theory and just, showing it through the lens of race relations. And in Marxism, there are only two classes. Like you said, there's the victim and there's the oppressor, okay? And under Marxism, that was called the proletariat, which was the working class, blue-collared people. And the oppressor under Marxism was the bourgeois or the rich. And so now, under critical race theory, the victims are people of color, or POC, a lot of people will shorten it that way, except Asians. They don't really include Asians in that category system. And the oppressors are the whites. And more specifically, the oppressors are the white Protestant straight men. So if you're a white Protestant straight man, you are the bourgeois. You're the one who's the one that's in control of everything, supposedly. The critical race theory also defines cultures in very distinct ways. There is no mixing of cultures allowed. And I was telling you about this chart here. So here's some of the ways that they have defined what it means to be white, okay? And this is their definition. So here they've got a whole chart here that lays all of it out for you. I've kind of highlighted the parts that I thought were more controversial than others, or bolded them, I guess I should say. The first thing they talk about is rugged individualism. They define that as self-reliance, independence, and control over your future. Also, to be white, you believe in a particular family structure. You believe in a nuclear family, which used to have a mom and a dad and their kids. And a husband is a breadwinner, the wife is subordinate to the husband, and the children learn to be independent as they grow up. This is supposed to be white. Emphasis on a scientific method. That means that you are objective, you believe in rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, emphasis on measurement. This is all within science. In history, it's based on European immigrants' experience, focus on the British Empire, and it's from a Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, this is supposed to be white culture. Protestant work ethic. White people supposedly believe in hard work is the key to success. Work before play. If you don't meet your goals, then you didn't work hard enough. Religion. Christianity is the norm. Anything outside of Judeo-Christian values is foreign. No tolerance for deviation from the single God concept. Status, power, and authority. Wealth equals worth. Your job is your identity. They believe in respecting authority. They have heavy value on ownership of goods, space, and property, so individual ownership. Future orientation. They plan for the future. Delayed gratification. Progress is always best. Tomorrow will be better than today. No belief in that. Time. White people supposedly follow rigid time schedules. Time is viewed as a commodity. Aesthetics, based on European culture, steak and potatoes. Bland is best. I don't know who's decided that white people thought bland food was best. Apparently, I missed the memo on that. A woman's beauty is based on blonde or thin. Barbie, man's attractive based on economic status, power, or intellect. Well, I don't think blonde is necessarily more beautiful, but Holidays, they're based on Christian religion. They're based on white history and male leadership. Justice, based on English common law. Protect property and entitlements, and intent counts. Competition, be number one, win at all costs. There's a winner-loser dichotomy. Action-oriented, master and control nature, must always do something about a situation. aggressive and extroversion, decision-making, majority rules when the whites have the power. Communication. White people believe in the King's English rules. They believe in a written tradition. Avoid conflict, avoid intimacy. Don't show emotion, don't discuss personal life, and be polite. What do you think about that? How do you think people of color felt when they saw that?
Like they were making them look like they're stupid. I mean, some of these things are like good things. Like most of them are good things, but they're also saying bad stuff, like avoid intimacy and what that's.
Yeah, right. Right. They sound. Go ahead.
I'd like to know who came up with this definition.
Mm-hmm.
Who decided this is what it was going to be defined as?
Yeah, well, apparently whoever works at that museum did. The National Museum of African American History and Culture.
It's probably a white person that made it up.
I don't know, but whoever it was, when this thing went up, people started getting so mad that they were forced to take it down. Because Black people and Latinos were saying, what are you saying? You know, are you saying that we don't believe in a nuclear family? That we don't believe in rational thinking? Are you saying that we don't believe in hard work and that you should be on time for things? That we should plan for our future? I mean, what are you saying? They were so, like, if you go today, there's a, I printed that off too, but I didn't bring it in here. But it actually says on there, you know, well, we had to take it down, but they still stand by it. They still stand by that belief, but they don't have it up there anymore. So, but plenty of people caught it and, you know, made reference to it and wrote articles about it. But yeah, I mean, basically they're saying that unless you're white, then you're not rational. You're not going to be places on time. You don't think that people should have individual ownership over things. I mean, it was a very, very racist point of view is what it was. It's presumed that since these are white rules, then they don't apply to people of color. And who decided these were the rules? Well, it's completely arbitrary. I mean, whoever wanted to decide that decided it. And they're just like, well, I just decided I'm an expert and this is what I think. Now, these ideas have been popularized by Ibram X. Kendi, who is the founder and director of the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University, and Robin DiAngelo, who was the person that wrote White Fragility. Became a very popular book. It was like New York Times bestseller. And these ideas have given rise to stuff like this from that museum and other writers that have come along and decided this is what it's going to be. And these books are sold in places like Five Below. If you walk into Five Below, you will find an Ibram X. Kendi book in Five Below. It's made for young people, you know, to fill out. I think it's like a writing journal kind of thing, where if you're Black, you're supposed to pick this up and then read through it, or white, you know, so you can discover your own white privilege. And in some high schools and in universities, they're required reading. You have to read them. They're even required by some Christian ministries. They've required their people to read these books. To mix or influence any of these cultures is called appropriation. So, for example, if a Black person speaks in a way that sounds educated and articulate, they are accused of acting white. So it's not okay for Black people to have appropriate English and grammar in the way that they speak. They have to speak with some kind of, you know, slang. The second one there, recently Justin Bieber's wife she posted a video teaching people how to apply darker lip liner with a lighter lipstick, which was really popular in the 90s. But all these people that were following her page said she was appropriating, because in the 90s that was popular for Black and Latino people to wear their lipstick like that. And so she was shamed and people were trying to shut her down because they said that she was appropriating Black and Latino culture just because of the way she was wearing her lipstick. So there's a problem with that. What do y'all think is the problem with that?
What happened to diversity?
Yeah, right. Right.
Like, Black people do get hated on if they, like, talk white sometimes, which is stupid because it's not. But what's, like, annoying is, like, other people copy, like, European styles all the time. Like, Black girls portray all the time, but when a white person does it, it's like terrible.
Yeah.
It's like they're like, if cultural appropriation is real, and people are literally saying oppressed cultures can't appropriate privileged ones or something.
Right. That's what y'all are saying basically, is that all cultures influence each other. You're all going to have an influence, especially in America, where we are a melting pot. That's what we are here, is that we take the best of everybody and we all get to decide who we want to be, who we want to dress like, what we want to look like. And we're supposed to be individuals, which is apparently, according to them, that's a white way of thinking. But in America, we're based on individualism that says we can be whoever it is that we want to be. And we get to choose who that person is, what we look like, and how we wear our lipstick. And if we like the way someone does their hair, we can do it like that person. And we're all influencing each other. And to me, this whole idea is kind of like a kindergarten tit for tat, like it was mine first. It's like, no, you can't do that. I did it first. But who really did it first? I mean, who way back in the day decided to wear dark lip liner with their lipstick? Was it a black person? Was it a white person? Who knows? Who knows who it really was? Who knows who really started the idea? So here's some questions I have. Should all black people have to live like their African ancestors? Because if they're over here in America and they're wearing Western clothing and they're doing their hair in a Western way and they're, driving Western cars, are we going to say, well, hey, because of European influence, that's the only reason why you're like that? Now all black people have to look like Africans. Is that what we're going to say? Are we going to start saying that any person of color is not allowed to wear blue jeans because they were developed by German immigrants? It was German immigrants that came up with Levi for the first time. So are we going to say, oh, no, only white people can wear blue jeans now because there was a German guy that came up with that? Or should we tell the white rappers like Eminem and these other country rap singers, they can't do rap. You have to sing like Loretta Lynn and John Denver. That's it. That's all you can do. You can't do. Where does it stop? Are black families allowed to have fathers in their home? Because this thing here just said that only white people are allowed to have nuclear families. Are we going to say that no, black people can't have fathers? Can white preachers shout from the pulpit? And who started shouting first? Was white preachers the one do that first, or were black people the first ones to do that? Where do you go? How far back do you go? When do you start saying, yeah, I'm deciding this is where the line is or where the line's not? It doesn't make any sense to say you can or cannot do certain things. It just, here especially in our country, we've all been learning off of each other and saying, yeah, I like that about you. Let's do that. Or no, that's not a very good way to be. Let's not be that way. And so we've been doing that for 200 years now. To expect a person of color to meet certain standards of timeliness. Okay, so this is according to critical race theory. To expect a person of color, and this is for real, to meet certain standards of timeliness, responsibility, dress codes, or personal conduct is to be racist. Even to expect basic rudimentary understandings of math, English, and science is considered racism today. Yeah, they want people of color to be dumb, is what it is. This includes school norms, such as turning in homework on time, sitting quietly in class, being on time, and maintaining levels of decorum and dress codes. It also includes office norms, using appropriate grammar and professionalism in written and verbal communication, being on time, keeping lunch breaks within the allotted time, and dress codes at work. Anytime you expect someone to hold to these standards, that's considered racist. That's considered bigotry. One of the things that Erwin Lutzer was talking about in his book, he quoted these math guidelines from this, let's see, did I mark it? Yeah. These are math guidelines from, okay, so he said, let's read quotes from the new woke guidelines for teaching math, titled, A Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction, which was produced by the prevailing equity philosophers. And here's a quote from this writing or whatever it was, a book or something. The program argues, this is a quote, the program argues that white supremacy culture shows up in the classroom when the focus is on getting the right answer, or when students are required to show their work while stipulating that the very concept of mathematics being purely objective is unequivocally false. The main goal of the program is to dismantle racism in mathematics instruction with the expressly political aim of engaging the socio-political turn in all aspects of education, including mathematics. So what they're saying is, you can't expect people of color to get the right answers in math. And if you do, you're a bigot and a racist. And Erwin Lutzer actually proposes a very interesting question here. He says, would you be willing to deposit your money in the new woke community bank if it were run by Princeton grads who believe that there was objectivity in math and that it's racist? Like, I'm not going to put my money in their bank. I mean, they'll be like, you know, they won't be counting it right, or they'll be maybe taking some out of it and going, oh, you $1 for you, $1 for me for your racism. $2 for you, $2 for me for your racism. I mean, I'm like, okay. So math now is bigoted. To actually say 2 + 2 = 4 is a racist statement. I actually heard on a podcast the other day that they had a teacher that did like a live video, and one of the things she said was 2 + 2 = 4 is racist. You can't say that. And to say that and to demand it is to be a bigot. This is really the bigotry of low expectations is what this is. This is saying, people of color, black people, Latinos, you're not smart enough to know math. And so we're going to,
So we'll just hold you down.
Yeah, they're just going to hold them down. They're just going to say, no, we're not going to teach you. We're not going to let you understand math. We're not going to give you an opportunity to excel and to do well. That's really what it is. Do you have any questions about that?
Do you think this is in a way a form of reparations? There's been talk about
Yes, going back.
just reparations for the African.
Do I think this is a form of
I think
reparations?
it's a form of reparations.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like trying to make it easier on them and give them.
That, and it's also bringing everyone down. There's no standards, so everyone kind of suffers. Everyone's paying.
Yeah, I mean that's the real result, is that everyone suffers. Now I think what they're trying to say is that, well, we need to make the standards lower so that they can keep up. But that in and of itself is a racist statement. That's saying that black people, all people of color, except Asians, because Asians do really well in all areas. They do better than white people in most areas of business and education. Asians, Indians and like Chinese and anybody from Asia, which includes India. They all do better than everybody, just about. The Asians do. And so it's funny because they're not really considered a person of color, even though they are people of color. So it's very arbitrary in the way that they define these lines of race. But it's very real that black and Latino kids are not doing as well in school, and they don't do as well in business, and they don't do as well in these areas of math and science. And they are trying to figure out why that is. And so they're saying, well, our standards must be too high for them. But the truth is that it has nothing to do with how they think or how well they think. Really what it has to do with is the circumstances in which they are living. And the culture in which they live, which, we'll talk about later. But the problem is there are no fathers in the home, especially in the black community. And it is a proven fact, even with white kids, if you take fathers out of the home, immediately the children are going to do worse. The whole family's going to do worse. The mothers are going to do worse. Everybody's going to be worse off. When you take the structure away from home, then you immediately put that person at a disadvantage. Immediately. So instead of working on the culture in which the poorer people live and helping them that way, what they've done is that they've, last time we talked about the social experiment that they've done in the black community. I think we talked about this before. They've really done socialism as an experiment in the black community, and the government has really used since the 1960s. They've really kind of made the black community sort of their experiment of what happens in a socialistic society. And when you see how much the black community has depended upon the government since the 1960s, you can see where it has led to, which has just gone worse and worse and worse. It's the bigotry of low expectations. When you tell somebody, you're not good enough, you're never going to make it, just let me take care of you, I'll do everything for you, don't worry about it. I mean, we as mothers know that. You don't set your child up going, you're not good enough, you're never going to make anything. No, you set the expectation a little higher so that they continually reach to that expectation. And by saying that you can't do that to communities of color, it's saying they're not good enough. You're constantly telling them, you're not good enough, you can't make it, so don't even try. So we've set this expectation, and we just keep bringing it down and down and down and down and down. We, as in a culture, not us in particular in this room, but especially the government is telling them, don't even try. You're not smart enough. You can't make it. But in reality, they can make it. They are smart enough, and they're more than capable of reaching these goals. What we've done is we've made them so dependent upon the government that now the families are falling apart. Nobody's taking care of them morally. They're only taking care of them physically. That's all they're doing.
It's financially advantageous for them to have a broken home.
That's right. That's right. They've set it up in such a way that you're better off to be a single mom. You're better off, financially speaking.
Yes.
And you're better off to kind of work the system. And they don't encourage or incentivize right living, healthy families, and because of the lack of healthy families, you've got all these young men getting into gangs and fighting each other, and you've got next time, hopefully next week, we'll talk about the gender binary and the purpose of men and women, and then we'll get into families and the point of families. But suffice it to say that if so goes the family, so goes the culture. That's kind of a saying. If the family's breaking down, the culture's breaking down, and we definitely see that, especially within the Black community, and more so in Latino communities, because we have set it up through the government to where you're incentivizing it. You're incentivizing people to live in these broken ways instead of incentivizing them to live in a healthy, holistic way. In CRT, if a person is born half white and half Black, then that person is forced into one of these two categories based on their appearance, even if that person might disagree. So what they call it is passing. So if you look white and act white and the way you look, then you are white. So you can't come along and say, well, I'm half Black and half white, so I'm oppressed too, or something. And they'll be like, no, you're not. You're not oppressed because, so we're not giving you any of the benefits because you look like a white person. And that also is very subjective. It's kind of like, if the mob decides that you're white, then you're white. If the mob decides you're Black, then you're Black. For example, James Franco, the actor, he was going to play Fidel Castro, maybe he still is. They cast him to play Fidel Castro in a movie coming up, and the outrage mob and everybody on Twitter and everything, they were saying it was racist and it was white privilege because he wasn't actually Latino, and they thought a Cuban person should play Fidel Castro. Well, it turns out that James Franco actually has Hispanic roots, and his grandfather was 100% Portuguese. But still, people were saying, well, that doesn't matter because he passes for white. So therefore, he is white. And so he shouldn't be playing this role. If you have darker skin, then you are Black, even if one parent is white. So this reminds me of what was called the one drop rule, which came from Virginia in 1662. And they would say, well, this person looks white, and so should they get all the white, get to go where all the white people go? And they were like, no, even if you have one drop of Black blood, then that makes you Black. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. It's kind of like, well, if you have the one drop rule, so even if you're half white or half Black, just because you look Black, well, you're Black. You're one of the Black people. So you can only act and dress and be like a Black person, because you look Black. We decided, the mob has decided this is how you're going to be, and you have no other choice. Critical race theory teaches that whites are born with privilege. Like I was saying earlier, this is known as white privilege. Since society is built on these white rules as defined by CRT, like timeliness and work ethic and communication skills in the nuclear family, then people born as white people have an advantage, is what they say. Just because you're born in the system and you basically live by the system, so therefore you have a privilege in the system, because you already know. Yeah.
Before you continue.
Sure.
With regards to this theory, how other than like the education system or in a political arena where laws are passed and things are being voted on and stuff like that, how is this being assimilated, would you say, as a whole, like through the culture? Do you understand my question?
How is it being assimilated, like as far as the rules and legislation and things?
How does a commoner, if they're not listening to the news or they're not in the education system, how is this being disseminated? That's my question. Other than the political agenda,
yeah,
and the school systems, or with people and the way they vote, and with you know things that they see on the news, or they're propagating that way. Can you?
That's how it's getting spread.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're not in those systems, you probably won't be as familiar with it, but it will eventually come to everybody. I mean, it's pretty much in everything now. So
being introduced in the kindergarten level.
Yes.
With the books.
Yes, absolutely.
It's really
all public schools, definitely. The laws are being written. They're even tearing down. They're renaming forts all throughout the United States right now, because they were, some of them named after Confederate people. They're doing this in the military, everywhere you go. I mean, and it's more of a mob mentality. It's definitely in all of the major systems. I mean, it's in the political for sure.
Right.
It's in schools for sure. Anything run by the government is going to have it. But the churches are embracing this. Campus Crusade for Christ had critical race theory speakers at their they have a major event, like a big staff event, where everybody and the whole staff gets together once every couple years. They have since repented from this, but I still think that they struggle with what it means and how much of it they want to accept and how much they don't, because it sounds, the way that it's framed sounds like it's a good thing. You want diversity. You want people to feel included. You know, we as a church believe in every tribe, every tongue, every nation. We are anti-racist from the core. I mean, that's who Christianity is. We believe in all people. And so it's been a real struggle for churches, because they know that they need to be, that they need to embrace people of all colors. They also know that they have not done a good job of mixing, and that, you know, we've got black churches and white churches and ministries that are, you know, that are seen as more white. And so that's why the devil is so good at what he does, because he can take what is good and twist it in just such a way that it is off. It's like an arrow. You know, we have the truth, and the arrow is straight, and it when you shoot it, it shoots true, and it shoots the target. But if you get that arrow just barely off, just by the tiniest percentage, that when you shoot it, not only is it not going to hit your target, but it's going to be way off there. But you can't tell that when you're looking at it so closely. And so that's what's happened with critical race theory, is that it has infiltrated the churches, and the churches have not been able to discern the difference between a healthy view of racism and anti-racism and an unhealthy view. Critical race theory is actually racist. That's the irony of it all, is that this is not just racist toward white people, it is also racist toward black people in the sense, and Latinos, in the sense that it doesn't treat them all the same. It doesn't believe, critical race theory doesn't believe that white and black and Latino people, they're all starting from the same knowledge, information, ability, aptitude. It doesn't believe that. It believes that white people have an advantage, and it teaches that white people have an advantage. And so anyone who actually ascribes to this, they will say that they are anti-racist, but in reality, they are the most racist, because they're saying not only is this the case? But also, you have to stay in your box. You're not allowed to get out of your box. You got to stay in it. And to me, that's the most racist thing of all. I mean, shouldn't we want people to share cultures? Shouldn't we want them to learn from each other and take the best that we have from each other and embrace that? To me, that's what you should want to do. To them, they're saying, no, everybody has to have their own culture, be in their own box, and divide us all into these different little squares where we're forced to live. But it's coming everywhere is the answer to your question. I mean, it's coming from everything. Now that you've studied it, you'll see it everywhere. You'll go, I hear these words. I know what you're saying. I know what they're talking about. And you'll see it everywhere. Okay, white privilege. Since society is built on white rules, then people who are born white have an advantage, according to them. Companies and brands cater to white people. So I always thought this was a good way to describe how people of color feel sometimes, like it's just a default white world, okay? So example, when a clothing or a makeup company labels something as the color nude, then they generally assume a light colored skin. So nude is always this, usually lighter than this even. Or like Band-Aids. If you go to buy Band-Aids, then they're always going to be in a lighter skin color Band-Aid. Not always anymore, because people have caught on to that. And so now they're actually making Band-Aids a different color. But many years ago, if you went to go get a Band-Aid, it was going to be a light skin tone color. Well, part of that is because businesses want to make money. Now, people of color see that and go, well, how dare you? I'm a person. I have skin color. My skin's not that color. Well, the fact of the matter is that the majority of the people that live in this country are white-skinned people, lighter-skinned. And the people are just in it, the companies are just in it for the money. So they're catering to the largest portion of people. And that may not be the best, but it's not racist either. I mean, they're just basically, you only have so much money to make things. You got so many people who are going to buy those things. It's just a matter of dollars and cents. So you're going to cater to the people that the biggest amount of people that you can cater to.
Economics.
Yes, it's economics. It's percentages. So you're talking 70% of the people in the country are white. So you're going to make most of your products white. But a lot of them have figured that out now, and they're making things that are different colors. But that kind of gives you an idea. That's sort of what they call a microaggression. It's not blatant racism, but it's favoritism toward white people. What I would argue is that favoritism has more to do with dollars and cents and less about white supremacy. So, another thing about white privilege, because of this privilege, according to CRT, all white people are born racist, as you said earlier, despite your own personal beliefs. And to deny that is to prove that you're a racist. So you're in a catch-22. So if you say, I'm not a racist, I've never been a racist, I don't look down on people for the color of their skin. Well, there you go. There's your racism showing right now. The only way to repent of this is to become what they call an anti-racist, which is a person who actively fights against the rights of whites and advocates for the advancement of blacks. Notice how other cultures like Latinos and Asians are often devalued or ignored. So sometimes they'll add in Latino. Most of the time, this is more so of a black and white thing. I think that is because this is the devil's way. He already knew that there was a crack there. He already knew that there was a history here of racism in the country, and he's using that to wedge in between. That's why the Latino and the Asians are kind of on the outskirts of this argument, and more as a white and black thing because of the slavery issue and a lot of the actual racism that the country has dealt with in the past. And so I think that the devil's using that as a wedge, and that's why it's most often black and white issues. So also because of this privilege, there is supposedly no such thing as reverse racism, which is to say, you can't say, hey, I'm white and you're judging me by the color of my skin. That's what we would call reverse racism. It's someone being racist toward a white person, which I heard Matt Walsh say one time. He's like, why do you even call it reverse racism? It's not reverse racism. It's racism. It's just plain racism. But that's what they refer to as reverse racism. So they would say there's no such thing as that. You can't be racist toward a white person because the white person is the one that's in charge and it's the oppressor. So, you can't use that argument. Any questions about that? White privilege? Nope. Okay. CRT teaches that capitalism and the founding fathers and all the founding documents, such as the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, system of checks and balances, 3 branches of government, even Abraham Lincoln himself and the Emancipation Proclamation are all racist.
It's scary. It's pretty scary.
I know. So, like, people used to say, well, our country is founded on biblical principles and the Declaration of Independence, this, and you know, there used to be the people who disagreed with that. No, our country's not founded on those things. It was founded as an atheistic viewpoint. Well, now they're not even arguing that anymore. They're going, yeah, you're right. It was based on Judeo-Christian values, and that's exactly why it's racist. That's exactly right. It was. And so therefore it is racist. Capitalism's racist. All of these ideas of individualism and freedom and rugged individuality and working hard for what you get and judge a person by their merit, not by their color, all that's racist. All of it. Everything from, so when they talk about our country needs to be changed, they mean from the roots and all. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, everything needs to be torn up, shred up, and tossed out on its ear. Burned.
But then they're like totally twisting Dr. King's words because he was literally like, judge someone on the content of their character, not on the color of their skin. Then these same people that were like, keep Dr. King's name, or Reverend Dr. King's name out your mouth this year, because blah, blah, blah. I'm like, and you're saying you love him, but you are totally glossing over what he's saying.
Yes, that's exactly right. They would disagree with everything. He is rolling over in his grave. He literally is. If he were alive today, he would be a conservative Republican. And that is the truth. Yes, yeah. Alveda King. That's right. It's his niece. But yeah, Alveda King, his niece, is a Republican, a conservative Republican.
So basically, it's all distorted.
Yes.
Everything that was original for the United States and the founding and everything is being distorted.
Yes.
And twisted. Like
Absolutely, 100%. And the next part here talks about the 1619 Project. Have y'all heard about the 1619 Project?
Yes.
Have y'all heard of it?
I don't know much about it.
Okay. The 1619 Project is, okay, so it started out, it attempts to rewrite the history of the United States as a power-hungry slave state, okay? In 1619, now this is true, that was the year that the first slaves came to America. And a journalist by the name of Nicole Hannah-Jones, she took that fact and she made up an entire historical narrative based on this fact, claiming that Europeans came to America not for religious freedom, not to escape persecution, nothing like that. She says they came here to protect slavery. And that she says that 1619 was the actual beginning of the United States, not 1776. It was 1619, and they came here for the sole purpose of preserving slavery. That's what she claims. It is complete bogus. It is completely made up.
When was this Hannah Jones?
I didn't write down when she wrote this. It was a few years ago, but I don't know when.
Fairly recent.
Very recently, yes. She was a journalist, and I believe she wrote for the New York Times, and it started out as this educational journalism series of stories. So she kind of started a series in the New York Times and was writing like a different article that would come along. It was a series. She also claimed that the Revolutionary War happened because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. So she was saying she heard that in England, they were talking about outlawing slavery, which is true at the time. William Wilberforce, around the same time as the Revolution, was trying to outlaw slavery. She says that they caught wind of this in the United States, and they didn't want to have anything to do with that. They wanted to make sure they kept their slaves, and so they declared independence from England to keep their slaves, so that they could have not just their slaves, but their whole system, she says, was in order to have power to the whites, to the white man. kind of a Nazi state, you know, kind of like the Aryan race is going to come over here in America and we're going to, you know, suppress everybody else. And so they liked having all that power and that control. And so that's really, she says, why they split off from England. These started out as an educational journalism series, but they ended up as curriculum in schools. So now she has written an entire curriculum that she has put into schools. Historians of all specialties have debunked this information and called it junk history. The first 5 historians wrote a letter demanding corrections and citing these issues with the information, but no retraction was ever made. So the editor of the New York Times helped her produce this information, Nicole Hannah-Jones, and he refused to retract any of it in the New York Times. And so even though none of her information is based on actual historical facts, there's absolutely nothing that she says in here. None of these changes that she makes to history are backed up by anything. It's just her conjecture. It's just her saying, well, what if this happened and what if that happened? And her sort of like coming up with these logical fallacies, you know, without any real evidence of any of this happening. So none of the documents, none of the letters, none of the anything that the founding fathers wrote or produced or anything, none of the eyewitness accounts that we have, nothing supports anything that she says. But yet, because this narrative is so popular with the critical race theory crowd, they've just embraced it. And they've just started teaching it in schools like it's facts and like it's reality, and it's all completely made up. Since, according to CRT, slavery was necessary to maintain the newly formed United States of America, there had to be a way to keep slaves peaceful and subdued. And guess how they did that? How would they subdue these slaves to keep them there, to keep them slaves so they wouldn't rise up and fight against them? Any idea? Smart girl.
It says it right there.
Well, you're reading ahead. That still makes you smart. Christianity. They're going to introduce them to Christianity. So according to critical race theory, Christianity is a racist tool. And the only reason why we use it is to suppress other people groups and to keep them submissive to their masters.
There's so many wonderful Christian Black people. I just when they hear this, I kind of feel that, you know, when the dust settles and all people come to their senses and realize how crazy this is.
Yes. Yes.
Because that's offensive.
Yes.
I mean,
exactly what I thought when I first heard it.
It just even to back up to the beginning, like, I'm not going to mention any places or names, but I'll try and talk and probably go. If I was a person of color, I would be so offended if I wanted to go to medical school and I didn't have to take the MCATs because and that's going on.
Yeah.
They don't have to take it because they're Black. And I'm thinking if you're a Black person and God has gifted you
Yes.
with the gift of healing and you have a brilliant mind, how offensive to think
Yes.
we would think you couldn't pass that test.
Yes. So offensive.
I'm like, a reasonable, if we take the Black community, I don't know why they wouldn't be offended by this.
Oh man. I can't. It blows my mind.
In
Yeah.
California, at some schools, they've dropped D's and F's for Black and brown children to give them more opportunities. What that's saying is all you Black and Latinos only get D's and F's. You're stupid. They also dropped them for taking the ACT because it's geared towards the middle-aged white, or not middle class white students. This Black guy stood up. He was like, "Are you saying I'm not smart?"
Yes.
Yeah, that is what it's saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's saying. And it's also saying that any Black person who is a Christian has been suppressed and has been white-ized, I guess. You know, they've made them like a white person.
And I'm going to go off on the word privilege because to me, I equate the word privilege with an honor. Like I'm privileged to be a mother and a wife.
Yes, yes.
And I love the privileges that God has given me. I don't feel entitled.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'm not complaining, just my pedigree or my legacy, but not that my family's perfect, but it's just sad.
Right.
It's sad to see the country even be more divided.
Yes.
Who we are, we're all created in the
Yes.
image of God.
Yes.
I mean, this is.
Isn't it sad?
Burn any books? They need to burn that.
I totally agree. burn all their books. Agreed. Okay. So Christianity to them is racist. According to them, slave owners used Christianity to keep the slaves obedient, occupied, and content to remain slaves. Many black Christians are now being taught that the religion that has brought them so much comfort, it's so sad, was just a tool of oppression. I'm so emotionally triggered by that, because I heard a lady on an interview that they were doing, and she said, I'm leaving the Christian faith because all this time I didn't realize that it was just oppressing me. It was just putting me under the white man's thumb.
And she hasn't met Jesus.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and it just shows you how evil it is.
Well,
And
Jesus wasn't white, so.
yeah, well, we're going to get to that. They misrepresent scripture that include the words slave and slave owner to overlay two different cultures and interpret them from their own perspective. So and we're going to go through this in a minute, but there are scriptures in there that talk about, slaves, obey your masters, and, don't be angry with them, and live content and this kind of stuff. And so anyway, the writers of critical race theory and the proponents of it, they use that kind of stuff to say, see, you would encourage, like slave owners sometimes would encourage their slaves to have their own churches and things on their property. And so they're saying, well, they did that so that they would keep them under their thumb, to keep them subdued and, so they wouldn't have an uprising. They wouldn't be angry with them. They would do what the Bible tells. They'd be good Christian people. And so they would say, well, that's why they're doing that, just to keep them oppressed. When in reality, is that many of the slave owners were Christians, even though they didn't see anything wrong with it at the time. Many of them were good people who treated their slaves very well, and so they allowed them to have these meetings on there. By the way, this is not in here, but Robbie and I, several years ago, went to South Carolina, and we went to a museum in a building that is one of three, I think that's all that's left in the United States, where they would actually auction slaves off. So it's right there in Charleston, South Carolina, because there was and it was the biggest, because there's so many ships that came in there for trade and everything. And in the museum, they actually tell you some facts and things about slavery. And what I learned in there was that 97% of all slaves were owned by 3% of the population at the time. 3% of the population owned slaves, only 3%, and 97 of the slaves were owned by that 3%. So I guess it had to be a little more three. But anyway, you see what I'm saying? 3% of the population owned 97% of the slaves. So a little tiny, tiny bit of the population even owned the slaves, and 97% of them were owned by that 3%. So to me, I thought slavery was widespread. I thought every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the South had a slave, but they didn't. Actually, most of the people, and later on I read a book called Rebel Yell that was about Stonewall Jackson and the Civil War. Most of the people that fought in the Civil War for the South did not know that they were fighting, quote unquote, for slavery. They thought that they were fighting invaders that were coming in to take over their state, because at that time, states' rights were much, much more important than the country as a whole. We weren't really a United States of America. We were more like states that were all happened to be inside the same boundary of a country. And so...
That sounds like what Putin has basically sold to Russia on the way that they're fighting in Ukraine.
Yes.
And because the people don't know, and they are
Right.
oppressed, because they don't have the truth.
Right. Right.
Which is what
So
you're
it's the
saying
same thing with the Civil War. Yeah, they came in and a lot of times these Northerners would come in and say, you know, we're here to take all your slaves, and the Southerner would say, but I don't have any slaves, and then the guy would say, well then why are you here? And he goes, because you're here. You know? So that was kind of the mentality, even though slavery was a part of the system as far as the generals and the president was concerned. The people in the South fighting the war who were actually there to fight, they had no idea that slavery was even part of the issue. They were really there to fight for their state or their land. They thought they were defending their land from people who were coming in to take over their land. But anyway, that's just kind of an aside. So slavery was not as huge of an issue to the everyday person as it was made out to be in books and even in history books. I thought that it was a much larger portion of people that were dealing with slavery. So, like I was telling you earlier, I took a class in critical race theory, and even though they called it multiculturalism, which is really a euphemism, anytime you hear that nowadays, it pretty much means you're going to hear something that has to do with white privilege or critical race theory in some way. So, I just made a list here of some of the things I thought were some of the more offensive. Now I made an entire, this is how many pages, maybe 8 to 10 pages of quotes that I got out of that book that I thought were extremely offensive as an American and as a Christian. But these are just 4 that I thought, or 4 or 5 of them that I thought were very telling. So here's a quote. The combination of the belief in a meritocracy, you know what meritocracy is? It's judging you by your merit. So harder you work, the better you'll do. That's meritocracy. The combination of that belief in meritocracy and religious or virtuous rationalizations for civilizing communities seemed godless or uncivil. That's just a fancy way of saying trying to make people better people with religion. So like spreading the gospel kind of thing. So meritocracy plus an idea of civilizing people with the gospel. And common teachings that racism occurs through individual acts of meanness, which is another way, like a lot of times you'll say, well, racism is when somebody's mean to somebody based on their race, calling them a bad name or, a slur or something like that. That's racism. Well, they would say, no, it's not. That's not racism. That's not racism at all. Racism is the systems that you've put into place that have, oppressed us. So the idea of a meritocracy plus civilizing people through religion plus individual, thinking of racism as just individual acts of meanness, this facilitates the invisibility or the system and systematic oppression in which European Americans and white American ethnics have subjected other groups of people. So I put kind of in other words there. They assert that Christianity has denied the existence of systemic racism by rationalizing racism in one of 3 ways: valuing merit and hard work, creating a civilized world, and or claiming racism only applies to certain individual acts, which is how it's been defined for centuries. Only just recently has racism been defined as a systemic problem instead of an individual problem. The second part here, it says, there are certain aspects of European American culture that can contribute to oppressive dynamics, such as the ontology of absolutism, which designates a clear right and wrong. In other words, they assert that to say some things are right and some things are wrong is racist. Why? Because these standards of right and wrong are based on a Judeo-Christian worldview. That's what it's saying. Letter C. Quote, the white race became synonymous with the dominant culture in the Western Hemisphere and favored by their God, a remnant of the Jewish tradition underlying much of Christianity. And the idea of race influenced not only social interactions, but also political decisions, scientific inquiry, and the theological positions for centuries. In other words, they assert, Christians thought they were better than everyone else because they were, quote, favored by God, and so they embedded racism in everything that they did, from social constructs to science. That's what it's saying there when you break the sentence down. And then the last part is about manifest destiny, which is a fundamental part of, the building up of our country from the very beginning, the early days when people were going out to the West and they were settling the West and they were discovering new lands and doing. They did that because of manifest destiny, which they believed was God's calling on their life to go out and find what was out there. This is defined as racist. The wide expanse of the North American continent, which was seen as unsettled by the new white American ethnics, combined with the Protestant understanding of destiny, to lead to a pioneer spirit that valued exploration and conquering the land as a way to demonstrate evidence of one's worth. This adventurous spirit and the belief that it was white American ethnics' manifest destiny to dominate the land is a clear example of how cultural and religious beliefs interacted. In other words, they assert that the only reason lands and people were conquered was because Christians thought it was their mission from God and they had to prove their worth. I guess someone should have told them that the natives and Muslims who have been conquering each other for millennia. Oh, and they wanted to spread their religion through evangelism, which is also racist. So for us to want to evangelize, that's proselytizing. So you'll see, to sum up here, here's critical race theory's view of Christianity. A, evangelism or proselytizing, as they would call it, is racist because it convinces others to be like white people. So to try to tell people about the gospel or to, present them as with Christianity being, what we believe is the right way of life, that's racist, that's appropriation. B, they would also say that evangelism is racist because it's the best way to oppress people of color. They don't fight back voluntarily, right? Like they said about the slaves. C, any person of color who lives according to biblical principles like hard work, contentment, nuclear family, respects authority, treats others fairly, ignores race, is living white, quote unquote, and has internalized their own racism. As a matter of fact, people like Larry Elder, who is a conservative black leader, he's called an Uncle Tom, and he was called, quote, the black face of white supremacy. So he's considered a white supremacist, even though he's black. By the way, he has 2 movies called Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2, and I've got the website there if you're interested in watching either one of those. I watched Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom 2 just came out, so I hadn't seen it yet, but Uncle Tom was really good. And it has a lot to do with these topics. Since the founding documents of the United States are all based on Judeo-Christian traditions, they are all racist as well. So that's the sum of it all. So any questions there until we move on? Because next we'll talk about why Christianity is not a white religion, as we probably all already know. Anything?
So, how many years has this agenda, if you will, really been present? Like since the 60s and just gradually starting to emanate into where we are today, or?
Well, so to speak, it's been around since Marxism. So it's kind of been in the very, higher learning, sort of underground. In the 60s, it kind of reared its ugly head there, and really came out with the sexual revolution, but it didn't come out as racism. And now it's rearing its ugly head again, but this time it's under a racist lens.
In 2020.
That makes any sense?
Feels like it's gotten worse since the George Floyd thing.
I think it probably, yes. Yeah, George Floyd definitely skyrocketed it majorly. But I think since Barack Obama became president, it really kind of came out then.
A lot of things in place for this to be right.
Yes, he did. He set a lot of it up underground that we didn't know what was going on, and then it's sort of like he kind of prepared the ground and planted the seeds, and now we're sort of reaping the fruit of what he did. And I'll also say a lot of racial frustration because of Barack Obama, because since he was a black president, even though he's only half black, but they kind of saw him as the person who could sort of heal all these woes and bring about a whole new era in race relations, and he really did not do that. And they were very upset. They were disappointed in what they expected. And I say they as a whole. I would say they as a whole. Obviously, there's a lot of black people that don't even like Barack Obama. But for those who ascribe to these types of beliefs, the leftist system of beliefs, they were really disenchanted after he left office. So He didn't do what they thought he would do, and I don't think he did what any of us thought he would do. He just made everything worse. So I would say he's probably kind of the starting place of a lot of this. Okay, number 4. But wait, page 7. Christianity is not a white religion. Someone forgot to tell the CRT people that Christianity wasn't started by white people. It was started in the Middle East by a Jewish man named Jesus of Nazareth and his 12 Jewish disciples. It spread throughout the Middle East, including Israel, Greece, and Egypt, and then spread to Europe through the Roman Empire, eventually making its way to England, France, Germany, and Spain, and that's how it made its way to America. And now we find it rapidly moving through the East in China, India, Africa, and Muslim countries.
I thought that all of his 12 disciples were like different race. Like, wasn't one black, one was Italian?
No.
Or was that the apostles?
No, we're talking about the apostles, same ones. The apostles, the disciples.
But like,
Where did you hear that?
well, I thought in the one of them was black. Like one of them
In
was
the chosen?
no. I thought in the like one of them was from Africa, one was from like Syria. Was it Peter or Paul? I don't know.
No. No, they're all Jewish.
They were okay.
Yeah. I'm trying to rack my brain. I can't think of any that weren't Jewish. Now, there were, like, Matthew was Jewish, but he was not, he was a tax collector, but he was still Jewish.
They were all ethnically Jewish?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what particular areas they were from. Not long ago, a few years ago, we went out to, where was that? I can't remember what fort it was, but anyway, Geronimo's grave was there, and I was reading a bunch of stuff about Geronimo, and he said, he's a Native American warrior, in case you don't know who Geronimo was, but he actually became a Christian. He was converted to Christianity, and he said, Christianity is better for my people than the religion of our ancestors. That's what Geronimo said. And then Bodhi Baucham's book, he talks about the fact that his ancestors were slaves, and I thought he had a really neat quote, and actually, I guess Erwin Lutzer thought it was a really neat quote too, because he put it in his book on this chapter, and I just thought it would be easier to find it here. So here's what it says about Bodhi Baucham. He actually, in his book Fault Lines, he's telling a story about how he had been told by his family, you know, and grandparents or whatever, that his ancestors in Africa were kings and queens, and that if the white man hadn't come in and taken them out of their homes, that they would all be like, ruling their kingdoms right now. And so he said, I went over to Africa and I thought, yeah, I'm going to finally find out about my king and queen ancestors, and what great people they were and everything. And he said, I found out that not only were my ancestors not good people, but they were slaves before they were sold as slaves in America. And actually most of the slaves that were sold in Africa were slaves because they were prisoners. And so he was like, my ancestors weren't kings and queens. They were prisoners and slaves already. And so he talked about how he was, but he learned that this was also the place where the blacks sold other blacks to slave traders. He writes, for the first time in my life, I forgave. I forgave the Africans who took my ancestors' freedom. I forgave the Americans who bought and exploited them. I forgave the family that replaced my identity with their German name. I just forgave. I did not harbor any ill will. I did not feel entitled to any apologies or reparations. By God's grace, I recognized that Providence had blessed me beyond my ancestors' wildest dreams or my own. I couldn't help but remember Joseph's words. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many should be kept alive and not as they are today. A few paragraphs later, he writes, who am I to tell a white brother that he cannot be reconciled to me until he has dredged up all the racial sins of his ancestors past and made proper restitution? Christ has atoned for sin. I thought that was really good. One time, Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali, he had gone overseas to Africa to do a fight overseas, and when he came back, of course there were reporters there waiting for him when he got back off the ship, and he said, one of the reporters said, hey, Muhammad Ali, what did you think about Africa? And he said, I am so glad my ancestors got on that boat. Because he's saying if they hadn't, he'd still be over there living in Africa. And he was so thankful to be an American. Now, I laugh at that and I say these things, and I don't at all want to sound like I am minimizing slavery, okay? Because slavery is not biblical. We don't ascribe to that belief. We don't believe any human being is any lesser than any other human being. But you do have to look at it within the sovereignty and the providence of God, like Bodhi Baucham said, and see that God has used this to bring about great things in the lives of many people who wouldn't have had a good life any other way. It's because they were brought here. And yes, it started out as slavery, but look at what has happened and how their ancestors have been blessed because of it. So God always uses the bad things in life to bring about his good. Okay. Phyllis Wheatley is another one. She came as a slave. She was a famous writer, actually, a Christian lady. And she was actually came to America as a slave. And but the family that she came into, she was a little girl when she was sold into slavery. And this family took her in as their own daughter. They raised her as their own. They gave her their last name. They basically adopted her. They taught her how to read and write and play piano and everything. And she was liked to write poetry and stuff. And she wrote one that said, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and that there's a Savior too." So she was always grateful. She actually did a lot of speaking around the country and as a Christian, and talked about her great gratefulness that she was actually brought to America and lived with a Christian family. Christianity didn't just bring religion, it brought better living. And so because of Christianity, we have science and hospitals and medicine, education, Oxford and Harvard and Princeton and Yale, they all started out as seminaries. The Christian missionaries have taught people to read and write and practice what you preach, like David Livingstone and Hudson Taylor and Lottie Moon. And the Bible says to care for the least of these, like William Wilberforce, who ended the slave trade in England, the entire British Empire, really. Jonathan Edwards, he used to advocate for Native American rights. Amy Carmichael, Mother Teresa, Josephine Butler, all these people. Where would the world be without Christian missionaries? Christianity is not just some kind of a oppressive tool by people. Everywhere Christianity goes, life is better. Biblical view of racism. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we should view racism. If we shouldn't view it the way that CRT says, how should we? So that'll be the next section. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. So what is the biblical view of racism then? Okay. There's only one race, the human race. So to even call it a race is kind of a misnomer. We all came from Adam and Eve, and later Noah and his descendants. So Genesis 9:19 says, "From these the whole earth was populated," and it's talking about Noah and his family. The idea of races actually came from Darwin's evolution. It's because of Darwin and his view of evolution that we even have this term races. It's an animalistic view of humans. Primal people are seen as inferior or lesser, and they're more like animals in the view of Darwin's evolution. See, when the Christian missionaries went to these other lands, they knew that these native people were smart, intelligent, talented. They could understand these concepts. They had no problem. But when you see it from an atheistic or a Darwinistic point of view, then native peoples are actually lesser than white people because they are more closer to animals, right? So as a monkey gets bigger and older and grows into a human or whatever they want to call it, then they're going to have darker skin. So in Darwin's view, anyone with darker skin is closer to an animal than people with lighter skin. This is literally what Darwin taught. So anyone who ascribes to evolution does not believe that people of different races are equal. They don't. Only the people that believe that God created mankind and that all mankind is related. We are the ones who believe that all people are the same, that they were created equal, and that they have the same intelligence and the same ability to do anything as anybody else. Ken Ham, in his book, One Blood, he even says we should stop using the term race at all. Now, I'm going to keep using it because that's the kind of the colloquial term that we all use. But he says we should use the word people group or even ethnicity instead of calling it races, because it's really not races. It's more cultural than it is race. The term race has been used to divide us into categories, humanize some, and dehumanize others. While there are differences in culturally, there's no biological difference on the inside, none whatsoever. If you took a person's skin off, you would not even know what ethnicity they were. You would have no idea.
Don't black people have more muscles?
No. No, they don't.
Well, my dad thinks it's because, like, he probably got shot for this, but because of that African dance they did, maybe they built more muscles.
No, I would say that there are people who it's genetics. It's just genetics. It's just like anything else. Because you've got black people who are short. You got black people who are really, big, around. You've got black people who are. It is a stereotype. That's exactly what it is. Yes, it's a stereotype. I would also say that culturally speaking, because in the black community, the athletes are so looked up to, that a lot of them just work hard to be good at what they do. That's all it is. So, like, literally, if a person goes in for a new kidney or a heart transplant or something like that, it is very possible that the best match for them will be a person of another ethnicity. So that's literally has no difference on the inside at all. Christianity recognizes humanity in all humans, from Adam to modern man. So Genesis 2:7, we're all created by God. Genesis 1:26, we're all made in God's image. We're all one family or one blood. Acts 17:26 says, and he has made all nations of men of one blood to dwell on all the face of the earth, ordaining 4 appointed seasons and boundaries of their dwelling. So we're all related to each other. And we talked about this before with the DNA. There are scientific studies to show, even now, scientists cannot deny it, that we all came from one man and one woman. DNA proves that. We're all loved by God equally and the same. John 3:16. God hates genocide. He hates murder. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. That's Genesis 9:4-6. In other words, the Bible teaches us to be colorblind, which is also considered racist by critical race theory proponents. So if you say, I'm colorblind, I don't care what color you are, I don't care if you're white or black or purple, to them that is racist, because you are, you're not recognizing their culture, they feel like. You said it earlier. MLKJ said we should judge a person by their character, not by their skin color. It's true. Okay, so we shouldn't see colorblindness as a way to erase a person's culture or history. So I asked a girl one time, she's a Democrat, black girl that I know, but she's a Christian. And I said, how is it that you think that this can be racist, colorblindness? And she said, because when you see me, you see that I have dark skin. It's impossible to say, I don't see your dark skin color. Obviously, you see it. And she said, but my skin color represents a history. So I have ancestors that have been slaves. I have, my friends and family are going to see things a different way. Basically what she's saying is I have a culture and I want you to respect my culture. So when you see me, you should respect my culture. So when we say that we're colorblind, what we're not saying is sameness. We're not saying you're no different than me. To me, I understood what she was saying, because we certainly don't want to see everybody all the same. You see what I'm saying? Like, you don't want to go, all black people are the same, all white people are the same. And you don't want to say that all people are the same, because we're not all the same. I grew up in a different, neighborhood than the rest of you did. And I had, maybe my family has a different background. Maybe I've got, Irish in my background, or maybe one of you has a black ancestor, or maybe one of you is from a German ancestry, or in some families, especially not in the South as much. I've noticed in the South, we're a lot more mixed than a lot of other places. You go to New York. First time I went to New York City, I thought, oh, it's the melting pot. Oh, they're really going to have it together here. It's going to be just like this wonderful place of cultures where they're all mixed together, and all this. I thought I would see interracial marriages everywhere, and I got up there and I was like, this is the most segregated place I've ever seen in my entire life. Because you got Chinatown, and everybody over here hangs out over here. All the Chinese are over here, and you got the Jewish people, and they're all hanging out together. I mean, like, they're very, very proud of their culture. And I mean, you talk to anybody and they're like, yeah, I'm an Irish descendant, and I'm a German descendant, and I'm a this descendant. Like, they're very, very, very proud of where they descended from. Well, that's fantastic. But I was like, this is not, to me, they shouldn't call it a melting pot in New York City. They should call it a stew pot. Because everybody kept to themselves, nobody, I expected cheese, when I hear melted pot, I was thinking more like you're going to have your cheddar and your mozzarella and everything all melted together, because that's we're more like that here.
A tray, and you've got your celery and your
Yes.
and your cheese and your pickles, but they're all in those little dividers.
Yes, exactly. It was like they were all kind of doing their own thing and they didn't really mix. And I thought, I never thought of the South as a place where there's really a mix of cultures, but I'm like, we're more of a melting pot in the South than they are up there in New York City. I mean, they're like divided in their little culture land, So I understand when a person is proud of their culture, but to me, it's much more of an individualistic thing, especially here in America, because we are going to have such different, I have Native American heritage in my family, and I have an Irish heritage in my family. But that doesn't define who I am. It just gives you some more information about how I see the world. That's all it does in my mind. So to me, it's more of an individual culture thing, and not so much of a group think, which is what I think it's turned into nowadays. Does that make sense? So we're not saying that when we talk about colorblindness, we're not talking about sameness. We're not saying, well, you're no different than I am. Well, in a sense, that's true. But in a sense, it's also not true, because we all see different things from our different cultural perspective. It could be said for the same, I grew up if you grew up with a mom and her dad, or a single parent home, or maybe you were raised by your grandmother. Or maybe, all these different things make us who we are as individuals. But for the Christian, what we try to do from a biblical perspective is that we try to emphasize what we have in common rather than what we have different. And I think CRT tries more so to emphasize what we have different. For example, you can't judge a person by their immutable characteristics. So you can't look at a redheaded person and go, well, I know how you are, because all redheaded people are the same. Or you can't look at a person with blue eyes and be like, yeah, all blue-eyed people are like this. Well, that's not true. That's an immutable characteristic. It doesn't say anything about who you are as a person, or your personality, or anything like that. But CRT sees your skin color as your defining characteristic. So if you're black, you're oppressed. If you're white, you're the oppressor. Period. The end. It has nothing to do with who you are on the inside. There's a lot of Bible verses that have been used to justify racism. And this is one of the things that they go over in this book. And I hesitated to go over it, and then I thought, well, no, we need to talk about these, because I felt like most people already know. But then I was like, well, maybe they don't. Christianity has, people like KKK has used Christianity and beliefs in Christianity to twist them, to turn them into acceptable reasons for racism. Now, thankfully, most of these kind of groups are gone now. There are not a whole lot of KKK members in the United States. I think there's like so many thousand in the entire world. There's just not that many KKK people anymore. And thankfully, they're gone. But even some groups, like the Southern Baptists at one time, they split off. The Baptists were all just the Baptists. And then when the Civil War came through, the Southern Baptists actually split off because they thought slavery was okay. And so there have been a lot of different Christian groups that people have used and said, well, Christianity has always supported racism. Well, no, it hasn't. There's always factions in every little group of people that use things. So I thought we'd go over a few of these verses that have been used out of context in case you run across it, okay? Slavery is a word that is often mentioned in the Bible, and they'll say that the Bible doesn't condemn it in both the Old and the New Testaments. It's even mentioned in the Ten Commandments, okay? Well, this type of slavery is called a bondservant, and it's voluntary, okay? It's not like the slavery like we think of today where a person is kidnapped and sold, okay? Sometimes bondservants are akin to indentured servants. It's like a hired hand like we would have nowadays, like maybe a nanny that lives in your house, or maybe a person that is a groundskeeper or something like that. So this is a person that's taken care of in goods and services. They get a dwelling, they get food, they get resources. people also became voluntary slaves in order to buy something. And so we get ourselves into this kind of slavery today. It's called credit card debt or a loan or something like that. So we still do this kind of slavery. So we're basically saying, I want to borrow something from you and I will pay you back. Well, back then they didn't do pay you back in interest. They would pay you back in services. So you would become this person's worker to pay off a debt or a loan. And for the Jews, all slaves were freed and debts were forgiven in the year of Jubilee. And that's explained in Exodus 21:2, which says, when you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th, he shall go out free for nothing. They get all their land back, everything. Everything goes back to the original owner in the year of Jubilee. So really, a person in the Jewish tradition could only be a slave for 6 years, maximum. Some of them would be shorter than that because the year of Jubilee would be, come up sooner than that. This is also reemphasized in Deuteronomy 15:12 through 18, and it says, if your brother, a Hebrew man or Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. As the Lord your God has blessed you, you shall give to him. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. And therefore I command you this today. So slavery, totally separate issue, not the same at all. The second one, Apostle Paul lays out a proper relationship between master and slave in Ephesians 6. So a lot of people will say, well, see, the Apostle Paul, he condones slavery. Paul doesn't mention the issue of whether slavery is good or as bad as an institution. He's just merely acknowledging that it existed. Okay? So in the days of the Roman Empire, it was a caste system. It's not like the American system of government that we have today where all men are created equal. So when Paul was laying out the relationship between slave and master, so he's basically saying slaves, don't hate your masters, be a good slave, do as you're told, that kind of thing. And so they're like, see, the Apostle Paul said that masters or slaves ought to be, subordinate to their masters, blah, blah, blah. Well, in those days, they didn't really have a choice. You just were in the system that way. It was a caste system. So if you're born a slave, you stayed a slave your whole life. There was no way out unless somebody did something incredible to free you. So these people are becoming Christians. And Paul's saying, don't be discontent. Don't be unhappy. He actually says at one point, now, if you have an opportunity to get out of your slavery, then get out. He's not telling people to stay slaves if they have an option. He's saying get out if you can, but if you can't, then it's okay. Your life can still be good. You can still be happy. If you're a good slave to your master, then he'll take care of you. He's kind of helping them through the situation. The point is not that slavery is good. The point is that it exists. And when a person's in that situation, how should they respond? So the Apostle Paul is really teaching on heart issues here. Sometimes you can't change your circumstances, but you can choose how to live in those circumstances. He even says in there, he encourages the slave that he's not a slave in spirit, but only in the flesh. So he's saying, just remember that this is just for now. This is just while you're alive. But one day, when you're in the spirit, nobody can enslave you in the spirit. You're always free in Christ, no matter what. The next one. Many have said that the mark received by Cain was dark skin. Have any of y'all heard that before? I've heard that a few times, because Cain, he's the one, he killed Abel, and when he did that, God marked him and said, because God threw him out of their midst, said, go out and you're going to be a wanderer, and Cain said, well, they'll kill me, and God said, no, they won't. I'm going to tell them all that if they do anything to you, then they'll have to face me for that. But he was given a mark. And a lot of people say that this mark that he gave Cain was his dark skin. But there's absolutely no reason to believe that whatsoever. The Bible doesn't even come close to that. No one knows what this mark was because the Bible doesn't say what it was. And to me, if it was dark skin, it seems like he would say he gave him dark skin. But it says it gave him a mark, which is totally different than somebody having dark skin. So I don't understand why those two things got convoluted. But even if the mark was dark skin, there's still no difference there because there are all kinds of sinners, murderers, and people who have done wrong. But God blessed them and their offspring. So just because a person, even if Cain had dark skin as his mark, this doesn't mean anything to a person's salvation or their blessing of God or anything like that. So I don't even see how that would even be the case, even if it was. But all this is moot anyway, because we're all descendants of Noah, and Noah was a descendant of Seth. So all of Cain's descendants died off in the flood. The only person that survived that was Noah and his family, his descendants. And Noah was a descendant of Seth. So to me, that whole thing about Cain and his mark doesn't even matter anyway. Bible-based Christianity has always fought against issues of racism. And here's some of the biblical teachings on race, and this is just some of them, okay? We don't even have to go through all of them, but Jesus showed us how to love the different cultures. He demonstrated this with the woman at the well, who was a Samaritan, Samaritans and Jews were, had a lot of racial animosity between the two of them. Jesus also demonstrated this with the story of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan, again, was supposed to be this big bad person to the Jews, and yet Jesus told a parable where the Samaritan was the hero of the story. Matter of fact, there were Pharisees in the story that turned out to be the bad guys. They never did stop and help the person, but the Samaritan did. The Samaritan was the one who stopped and helped them. So Jesus is breaking down racial barriers with that story. Leviticus, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourselves, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Okay? Galatians, there is neither Jew nor Greek. Romans, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all. Jew and Greek is just a representation of different races. It's saying Jews, because Jews thought, we're the chosen generation. We're the ones that God loves. Everybody else, you're Gentiles. You're not the chosen people. And the New Testament comes along and says, no, actually, you are the chosen people in spirit. Now we no longer are children of God through the flesh. We're children of God through the spirit. And so he's saying there is no difference between Jew and Greek. We're all treated the same under God's eyes. Let's see. Romans again, for God shows no partiality. Acts. So Peter opened his mouth and said, truly, I understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. Acts. And he made, we did this one earlier. He made from one man every nation of mankind on all the face of the earth. Acts 10:28. And he said to them, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation, but God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So the Bible says, nope, it doesn't matter what race, what ethnicity you are, what country you're from. Everyone is accepted into God's kingdom. And then there's biblical teaching on slavery and freedom. Philemon 1:8-16. Okay, so Paul in Philemon is writing about Onesimus. And this Onesimus is a bondservant who's been accompanying Paul. And then Paul sends him back to his master. But when he does that, he says, I hope that when you take him in, you don't take him in as a bondservant, but that you take him in as a brother. So Paul is basically saying, please set this person free. God's people were once enslaved by Pharaoh. And yet he sent Moses and said, you shall remember that you are a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. So his people were once enslaved, and he set them free. And then here's Exodus 21:16, which to me makes it pretty explicit. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of a man shall be put to death. That sounds pretty much like God's against slavery. I don't know what you think, but that sounds pretty clear. And then in Timothy down here, he actually adds people that are enslavers in this list of people who are going to hell. So he says, for the unholy and the profane, for those who strike fathers and mothers, murderers, sexually immoral, men who practice homosexuality, liars, perjurers, and enslavers. Okay, so God does not look kindly upon people that enslave other people. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female. For freedom, Christ has set us free. And so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. And then here in 1 Corinthians is where I was telling you about, where Paul said, were you a bondservant when called? Do not be concerned about it. But if you can gain your freedom, avail yourself of the opportunity. For he who is called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freedman of the Lord. You were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants of men. So you don't need to become a bondservant, which means you don't need to put yourself into debt to someone else. Then, does anybody have any questions about those? Have y'all ever heard about how that people have said the Bible condones slavery? Yeah.
What about the male or female thing?
What about it?
Like, is that where people might think that the Bible condones?
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, what he's saying is in that scripture, the context of the scripture is talking about who is welcomed into the kingdom. And he's saying that God doesn't show any partiality to anybody. So if you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter. You're still welcome into the kingdom. If you're Jew or Greek, doesn't matter. You're still welcome in. If you're slave or you're free, doesn't matter. You're still welcome in. Everybody's welcome to the gospel. Okay. So history. Now there's a whole section in Wikipedia about Christianity and abolitionism. Believe it or not, you wouldn't think Wikipedia would have something like that, but they do. There's a whole page. I have it printed out somewhere. But here's just many of the different people throughout Christianity, through the history of Christianity, who have been fighting against Christianity fighting against slavery and fighting for the abolition of slavery. The earliest one that they mention is from the 4th century AD. That's the Bishop Gregory of Nyssa. He questioned how a person could put a price on a human consciousness and one made in the likeness of God, which I think is a really interesting point of view. It's like, how do you put a price on a person who has consciousness, who is made in the image of God? That was his whole point. And then in the 1700s, of course, William Wilberforce was a big proponent of abolition, which is funny because at the time it was not popular for a person to talk about their faith in politics. And William Wilberforce just kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. And finally, in 1833, the entire British Empire, which I think was like 70% of the earth at the time, or the known world, was under the control of the British Empire. And they actually outlawed slavery in 1833. Charles Spurgeon, preacher of preachers, had some of his sermons burned in America due to his censure of slavery, calling it the foulest blot, and which may have to be washed out in blood. So he really, really hated slavery. He hated that America had slavery. John Wesley, who was the founder of the Methodist Church, he denounced human bondage as the sum of all villainies. Charles Finney, he preached that slavery was a mortal sin. The Quakers in 1688 was their first anti-slavery petition. And then 1787, the Quakers established the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade, and they founded a school for blacks in 1770. They regularly protested and wrote letters to Parliament. Christian abolitionist movement in the United States stirred up dissenters who called them, so this is what the dissenters said about the Christian abolitionists. They said they were the same old church and state zealots who tried to shut down post offices, taverns, carriage companies, shops, and other public places on Sundays. So they're basically calling us the same thing nowadays. It's just church and state zealots. Despite determined opposition, many Methodist, Baptist, and Presbyterian members freed their slaves and sponsored black congregations in which many black ministers encouraged slaves to believe that freedom could be gained during their lifetimes. So many of the churches, everybody blames the Southern Baptists and saying, the Southern Baptists, they supported slavery in the Civil War. Yes, they did, but there were a lot of other Baptists that did not. There was actually a split, and those Baptist churches helped start black churches. So because of these congregations that did this, the Methodists and the Southern Baptists and Presbyterians, I think, they were the ones who started helping build these churches for black communities. And then the Great Revival of 1801, followed by the Great Awakening, made abolition a popular topic supported by many fundamentalist churches. Baptist and Methodist denominations split, especially in the South, leading up to the Civil War. So Christianity has been a bulwark in abolishing the slave trade, okay? So don't let anybody tell you that Christianity had nothing to do with it. Actually, it's because of Christianity that we even have human rights. this article here that I was telling you guys about really opened my eyes to understanding where they thought these rights came from, if they didn't think they came from Christianity. And I've never read this before, heard it before. So I'm curious to see if you guys have heard anything like this. Do you have any questions about slavery and Christianity?
Why didn't the black and whites just worship at the same church?
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I would assume because they felt like they were supposed to be separated. I don't know why. Huh?
They might have sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why, and I don't know if. I didn't look that deep into it.
But
I don't know.
and culturally, like you said about New York City, we still have Korean churches here. And,
Right.
And
Right.
know why that
I don't.
interested
I don't
me.
either. I don't. I mean, I can guess or give you maybe different ideas, but I would just be guessing because I don't know really. Any other questions? No? Okay. So Christianity and human rights. Now, most people, have you guys ever heard of another way of how we get our human rights besides God giving us our human rights? Like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, that's what we consider our inalienable rights in America. No? Because I was like, well, where else did they think they came from if they didn't think they came from? Well, okay, so most people think that civil rights was a secular idea that came from as a result of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment was an era where people tried to, how do we put it? They thought, okay, we are an advanced society now, and we no longer have need for superstitions like religion. And we are going to base everything that we do on logic and reason, and we're not going to have any superstitious, supernatural, mumbo jumbo stuff. We're just going to do everything based on logic. That's how we're going to make all our decisions. This was kind of the Enlightenment and what they were thinking. They thought of faith as superstitious, and only rationalization was kind of the god of the age. But the concept of human rights is actually rooted in the Bible. So the reason they thought this in the Enlightenment was because the Romans and the Greeks actually used the term right in their writings. But only up until, this was written in 2015, so recently, before then, they found out that the word that they were using, right, was not what we think of today as a right. It was really more so like your due, like what's coming to you. So if someone murdered somebody, they would say, well, then he needs to receive what is right, his right, which is the death penalty. That would be his right. So it'd be like basically what you're owed. That's what they meant by a right. Or we might say he got what's coming to him. Okay, so that's what they thought of as a right. The idea that a person has rights just for being a human is actually rooted in the Judeo-Christian teaching. Have you heard of the Imago Dei?
Yes.
The Latin term that means, what does it mean?
It means
Do you know what it means?
image of God.
Yeah,
That
and
we're created in God's image.
that's right. We're created in God's image. Imago means image. Dei is the Latin word for God. God created a system of law and order and roles when he created the family, which was in Genesis 2. He said, man and woman are one flesh, be fruitful and multiply. And then Ephesians 5, Paul expands upon that and shows us how this is a reflection of Christ in the church. So by making man and woman and children submit to the parents, he's actually creating a hierarchy or a system of government. That's what that is. And then later on, God gave us the 10 Commandments, which gave us rules and orders on how we should live and treat each other, and children honor parents, and loving your neighbor, and worshiping and obeying God. Again, this is a system of government. He's showing us these are the rules, and here's what happens when you break the rules, and here's how you should live. Mosaic law, an extension of the 10 Commandments. It's a question of how we should treat each other in a variety of situations, and it shows us that how and that we should care for the most vulnerable in society, which includes women and slaves and children and orphans and widows and foreigners. So all of this is actually where all of the idea of a right comes from. The New Testament talks of freedom, and Jesus continually tells us how to treat the most vulnerable in society in the New Testament. So Jesus took the law of Moses from the outward to the inward. So when Jesus came, no longer was the law just a matter of what you did, it was your motivation of your heart. And the founding documents speak of our inalienable rights that were endowed by our Creator. That means that these rights were given us to by God, and they can't be changed or taken away because they were given to us by God. So all of these ideas of a right or civil rights is actually grounded in Christianity, which I knew that part, but I had no idea that the other side of it thought that they had come up, that the atheists had come up with an idea of rights, and that they thought they were from the Enlightenment and the Romans, which actually is not true at all. So Christianity and Marxism, or critical race theory, they can't live together. It's because of Judeo-Christian values that we have rights at all. Only a Judeo-Christian foundation tolerates differences. We even tolerate different religions. No other worldview does that. There has to be, in all other worldview, they demand oppression. Marxism offers help for the oppressed, but it doesn't deliver. So it says it'll help oppress people, but it doesn't actually help oppress people. When you're finished with the proof is in the pudding. When you're done doing the recipe and cooking it all up, reality takes over. We can see from history what happens under Marxism. All freedom is taken away under the guise of fairness and equity. To support and believe in critical race theory is to cut off the branch that you're standing on. So what proponents of critical race theory, Christian proponents of critical race theory, don't understand that they are cutting the legs out from underneath themselves, because critical race theory's ultimate goal is to show that Christianity is racist and that everything that's built on Christianity is racist, and every single last part of our government, which is built upon Judeo-Christian values, is also racist. Stand on God's word, and all people groups around the world are better for it, Christian and pagan alike. So whenever we are critical race theory is trying to take that away from us. They don't want the world to be a better place. They don't want people groups to unite. They know that we are weaker when we're divided, and so they are trying to divide everybody up into their little squares. And but when we stand on Christianity and the truth of Christianity, we're actually united in that. Questions?
About dealing with Christians that love critical race theory.
Dealing with them?
Like, how to change their mind.
If only I knew that.
Say this
The Holy
stuff.
Spirit pray for them.
Yeah. I mean,
That
that's,
it wouldn't be a stumbling block.
yeah.
That we could engage with them in a meaningful way.
That's what I'm trying to do, is to equip you so that you can have intelligent conversations when people come to you and say, well, the Bible supports slavery, so you can't, well, does it really? Let's go over some things. Let me tell you some stuff.
I got 14 pages.
Exactly. So yeah, just hand it to them. Read that.
I'm gonna start carrying. I'm gonna carry this around in my purse. I'm genuinely.
I'm going to say bye to the Facebook people. Is there any other questions that they need to hear? No? Okay. Bye, Facebook people.